Hi, this is the Magnificent Midlife Podcast, and I'm Rachel Lancaster. This is where we celebrate women in midlife and beyond. We challenge the status quo and bash those negative stereotypes about being an older woman. We're not over the hill at 40, 50, 60. We're just getting started, and the world needs us now more than ever. I'll be talking all things midlife, about issues that matter, and sharing fabulous stories of amazing women doing very cool stuff. Now is our time. My guest today is Dr. Amanda Hanson, who is a clinical psychologist and coach. She's the midlife muse on social media, which is where I discovered her. She wants to revolutionize midlife, turning it from a crisis into a time of power and joy. Bit like me, really. So welcome, Amanda.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy that you found me, Rachel. It's so incredible to see like-minded women around the world doing the same kind of work.
It's great to connect across the oceans and the land masses, isn't it?
Yes.
That's the power of the internet.
Yes, absolutely.
So I know that you're as passionate as me about changing the narratives about women and age. So how did you arrive in this place?
That's a great question. As I was entering my 40s, I noticed my husband's 6 years older than me. I noticed that he had sailed through or come into his 40s and in his mid 40s at that point without even, there was not a conversation, there was not a blink of an eye. There was just this assumption that he was just going to keep doing life. And I noticed that for him and his friends, there was just an ease around it. And if anything, there was like a distinguished nature that was happening, like this really incredible energy around aging as a man. Where I found at a lot of the gatherings I was at, women were off to the side talking about all the things midlife that we were supposedly stepping into, and talking about what is that going to be like? What are you going to do about it? How are you going to handle it? And so that was really the beginning for me of starting to think about, gosh, I didn't even think about how I'm going to approach my midlife. I worry, had I not started having those conversations, maybe I would have done things and just ended up in places and spaces unconsciously because I was on autopilot, like I was watching so many people do. So it was soon after I started having these conversations that I found myself sitting in a hair salon one day, getting my grays covered. And I don't even know what happened. I don't think I'll ever know. It was like some universal moment where I was on my phone and I looked up and I asked myself that question of, how did I get here? How did I believe that this is what I needed to be doing as a woman who was aging? My husband never thought for a moment to go color his hair, nor his entirely white beard. And so it really started me on this whole adventure of understanding the double standards. So that's where it started for me, is the double standards in midlife. Men are revered, women are shamed. So that was really the beginning of the journey. And then I started looking at every aspect of the double standard, from sensuality and power and jobs and everything about what it means to be an aging woman. And it really brought me to such a beautiful decision around how I wanted to age. I got really, really clear that I wanted to age as a spiritual journey, not as a physical journey. Not that I'm denying what's happening physically. I'm actually meeting it in the mirror every morning and celebrating it. So I decided I refuse to allow the world to tell me how I'm supposed to do this to be valuable.
Woo! I love it. I absolutely love it. Yeah, that's why I had to have you on the podcast, because I love the way you frame it. Yeah, it's just so crystal clear. Is these double standards, and it is outrageous. It is obscene. The pressure that puts on women throughout their life, because it starts really early. I'm going to get on to asking you about TikTok, but I'm just going to tell you, you inspired me to go on TikTok. And I did a TikTok video and I asked people, when did they first learn that aging was bad? And I said, maybe you were in your teens or your 20s or your 30s. Maybe you were really lucky it wasn't till you were 40. And I got so many comments back. And the most shocking one for me was a woman who said she was 5. And she saw an advert on the television for a face cream that would take 5 years off her age. And she imagined herself disappearing completely.
Oh my gosh. I just got full body
I
chills.
know. I know. I couldn't believe it.
Oh,
And another woman said, I was 13. My own mother told me to start using anti-aging products. It makes me want to vomit, actually. I'm just sort of like, I can't believe it. And yet I can, because I know, I understand, I know this. It's just that when you're confronted with the evidence like that, it really makes you stop and go, okay, so this is why I do what I do, and this is why you do what you do, and this is why we're here having this conversation. Woo!
absolutely. And the thought that we as women, I think that the message we get very, very young, even before we fully understand it, is that our value, our worthiness is based in how youthful we look,
Mm-hmm.
how we look at all, period, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we are running constantly chasing new standards, new beauty standards. And even in regards to, I've had conversations with friends on men and women about women and aging and sensuality. And I've asked men in particular, tell me what you believe about women who are aging in sensuality. And they say, I believe it's women over 50 who actually know what they want, who are at home in their body, a confidence in their body. I feel like being with an older woman, this was, guys in their 30s that I was speaking to, being with an older woman is such an incredible experience because they are often the leading. And I just thought, well, isn't that amazing? Because behind closed curtains, this is the conversation. But I think on the outset, everyone is programmed to go after or be interested in the most youthful looking woman in the room. Maybe because it stems back to like she would be able to provide you with more children if she's more fertile. But I think that if we just need to be having more of these conversations, because I am going to be 50 in November and I have never felt this sensual. Have I been more turned on at other times in my life? Yeah, probably, but I've not felt this kind of embodied sensuality and power that I feel now. And the reason I do this work is I want more women to have that freedom, that liberation, that tapping into this part of themselves.
Well, I think that there is, I do a lot of work around menopause, and I had this early menopause diagnosis, and that's what started me off on this long journey now, because that was when I was 41. I'm now 56. And we have this feeling that as we go, we don't just lose our fertility as we go through menopause, but we lose our sexiness, we lose our vitality, we lose our sensuality. We are just, what I thought, the dried up old prune. And that is the narrative we have to change. And I love encountering women like you who are passionate about changing that narrative and passionate about showing women that we can be beautiful and sexy at any age, as well as very intelligent and very experienced and full of wisdom. You don't just get more wise as you get older. You don't sacrifice your sensuality for wisdom. It's just silly, isn't it?
Yes, it's not that one has to go down so the other can rise. I feel like all tides are rising at this point in my life. and a compassion and a reverence for all my body has done for me to get me to this point in my life. I'm in awe.
Yeah, me too.
So I actually refuse to slather it with poisonous things. I refuse to put chemicals in it, on it, because I see it as this temple, and I want to take the most exquisite care of myself as possible.
And I know I don't know for sure, but I know from the way you interact with the world and what you say that Mama Gena has had an impact on you. And
Huge.
I went to, so people who don't know Mama Gena, so I used to live in America, so I'm open to all these crazy American things that the British are a bit sort of like reserved about. Couldn't possibly do that sort of thing. We're not quite as bad as that, but so I'm a bit more open to that. And I had followed Mama Gena for several years, and I'd moved back to the UK, but I was planning to go to Mama Gena's weekend in February. And I scheduled it. This was my return visit to hang out with my friends in New York. And it was the same time, the same weekend as the Women's March in Washington. So I ended up going to the Women's March on the Saturday. And then so I only did one day of Mama Gena on the Sunday. So it's this 2-day live event in New York. And it's all about empowering women, but it's all about women's sensuality and coming back to their innate sensuality, isn't it? So just tell me a little bit about Mama Gena and her impact on you, and just tell me.
Well, Rachel, this is crazy because we were there at the same time.
Really? Oh. My goodness.
Isn't this crazy to think all these years later, two strangers in an auditorium who didn't know each other are now talking on your beautiful podcast. This is incredible.
There you go. Serendipity.
So incredible. I had first got her book, Pussy. And for me, I felt like everything that I was reading was everything that I had felt, but never had the words for. Right? Like it was every line. It was like, yes. Oh my gosh. Being a woman started to make sense. I felt like I had a way to better understand the complexity of my emotions and sometimes the shame and the things I was navigating in my life. I felt like Pussy was this context for understanding the layers that we are as women and doing it in a way that was celebratory versus shaming. And so for me, I was like, who is this woman? How do I get in touch with her? Can I work with her? And lucky for me, she was having the event. So I went to the experience and I went with a couple of girlfriends. I was so profoundly moved by watching other women's experiences on stage as well. And I was like, I need more of this. So then I signed up for Mastery and I did the 3 weekends in New York for Mastery. And some of the most powerful shifts, one in particular that happened at St. Bart's Church, one of the most powerful days of my life, where everything in my system reorganized and everything made sense of what my next steps were. And then I also signed up for Creation, and 200 of us went to Creation in Mexico. And then,
oh my goodness.
And then before we know it, the world shut down. So she stopped offering those live events to my knowing at this point. So I really felt like the timing was exquisite. And I feel so fortunate that I got to be a part of it. And every step that I took just continued to highlight further and further my voice in the world and the way I needed to show up with my own unique way of sharing this information. And for me, it had that lens of more of the midlife, because I feel like those are a lot of the women who are like, well, I'm not exactly sure. Can I go to that? How do I fit into this? Is this even relevant for me? So my focus became a little bit more towards the midlife space.
But that's who Mama Gena is, isn't? I mean, she is just the most delicious older woman celebrating everything about herself, and she's never going to sit in the corner and knit, it's just not going to happen.
Never.
So, but she's amazing. I think it's so empowering to, I suppose, to be given permission. That's what she does at these events, isn't it? She gives women permission to be sensual, to be erotic, and to bring all of that to who we are. And I think that as we get older, it's even more important, isn't it, that we hang on to it, that, we don't exchange wisdom for sensuality, but that we can have it all, actually. Not necessarily all at the same time, but we can embrace everything that is a woman. We don't have to trade things off as we get older.
Absolutely. And I think the question and the investigation and curiosity around what does it even mean to be aging? And as far as I can see, it's all mindset. Do I want to wake
Yeah.
up every day and tell myself the story that this is awful, this is terrible, this is scary, I can't believe it? Or do I want to wake up and every morning meet myself in the mirror with the beauty, like I said, the reverence, the awe, the incredible journey that it is, the constant discovery of another silver hair or another line on my face, right? And not see it as something I have to hide away, but that I can be front facing and proud of. So I choose the latter. Those are the stories, lines, and the narrative that I'm telling, because I want to tell a story when it's all over. When I'm in my final hours, I want to look back and tell the story of the beauty of this time of my life. And I don't mean physical beauty as much as spiritual beauty. I don't want to look back and remember that I was running, trying to get away from all of this and feel badly about it. But I was firmly planted and proud.
I think women can waste so much time trying to chase the elusive youth that isn't there anymore. And why bother trying to chase it? It's really just because we've been taught that that's what we have to aspire to and that's what we have to be. I think you're on the West Coast, aren't you? Are you in California?
I'm actually in Miami.
You're on the so you're not on the
Yes.
West Coast. I think so. The West Coast, from my experience, it's even worse in terms of that, that physicality and having to look a certain way and having that's both body and face, and the pressure on women, especially, to maintain a certain way of looking.
But I really want to pause and highlight the fact that we have created that storyline. This is not, I think it's easy to blame the patriarchy or men. And I'm just not in favor of that, because no one is forcing any of us to open our pocketbooks and spend money on toxic beauty culture. That's a choice we're making. So we are not victims. If we choose that we want a different narrative, it's up to us to change it instead of sit back and be like, oh, but this is what's expected. It's not what's expected if we choose differently. I will tell you that. And if I could even, I've lost count at this point. The amount of men who come up to me on the daily. I can go nowhere without men coming up to me when I'm with my husband, when I'm with my adult children, when I'm with my girlfriends, when I'm by myself, constantly saying how much they love my hair. They're like, it's so beautiful. It's so powerful.
It is beautiful.
It's so
it
this.
Is.
But the reason I'm even sharing it is because we have this belief system that it's going to repel, or it's actually the opposite. It showcases something, I think, different and unique that is very damn refreshing. So I just say that we as women need to stop. If we want things to change, we need to put our money into other things. I prefer to put my money into growing my business, traveling the world, having beautiful experiences in my life, not in putting my money into, toxic things like Botox or all of that culture. I refuse. I'm insulted by that narrative. I'm insulted that I would need to do anything to be worthy.
Yeah, that's why it is truly, truly outrageous. You're right, we do have a choice. But I think it's interesting because I find that, and you may find this as well, it's not until we start talking about these issues and we have conversations like this that people have even considered that there's an alternative. So sometimes, a lot of what I've written in my book is about challenging the narratives around women, midlife, aging, menopause, because we assume that our Western experience is the norm, and it's not. If we look to other cultures, it's completely different, and we can take inspiration from other cultures. But it's not until you actually say that to somebody sometimes that they realize, because so I think sometimes it is really difficult. And it also, I think, depends for women with the hair issue. Certainly here, there are women who feel they have to dye their hair to stay in work, just to even be seen in work and not be completely dismissed. And that is outrageous, and that needs to change. And I always now, I have to explain to people who listen to this podcast regularly will know I don't dye my hair. I know it looks as if I do, but I don't. And I have a few little white hairs at the front that I'm very proud of, but that's all I've got so far. But this pressure on women to have to change, that we can't just age as we age. I was filming the other day and there was one woman who had spectacular hair like you, and she's a black woman, so it was all curly and it was just amazing. It was totally just so eye-catching. And another woman was there who was still dyeing her hair, and she said, I'm just not sure about the grey, because letting it go grey, because I don't know if it'll suit me. And I looked at her and I said, why would you think it wouldn't suit you? Because that's what you're naturally going to do. That's how your hair is naturally supposed to go, if that's your genetic makeup with your hair. So why on earth would it not suit you? I was like, that was a really interesting comment. And obviously this was, praying, and I'm sure it prays for a lot of women. Would it suit me? So I carry on dyeing because I'm too scared to find out.
It's so true, because a lot of women say that to me, like, oh my gosh, it looks so good on you, but I would look too washed out, or I could never do it. It wouldn't look right on me. Right. So it's this, they have convinced themselves that they only look good a certain way without even the curiosity or the adventure of trying. And, to each their own. Everyone will find their path, find their way. The liberation and freedom that I have in my life, because I don't have appointments like that to go to, is very incredible and very freeing. I have nowhere to be if I have somewhere to be, it's because I'm choosing to luxuriate in an experience with a friend, as opposed to feeling like I need to get this thing done to me. And I even think that there's been a really incredible brainwashing that has happened Western wide, that really convinces women that this is a form of self-care.
Yeah.
That getting all of these things done.
Not giving up. Not giving up, isn't it? So you, because if you stop dyeing your hair, you've given up. You've given in to the aging process. You've given up. I think it's rubbish. It's
such a load of rubbish. And now I even hear a lot of the lingo is almost as if these things are empowering. Right? Like staying youthful, staying edgy, and the eyelashes and the Botox. And it's like, it's a form of power. It's like the ultimate feminism. And I'm like, oh, wow. Now we're wrapping it in everything that's actually the opposite of, as far as I can see. And all of this study I have been doing about what it means to be a woman. And so each woman will choose what feels best for her. But I just love that we get to open up these conversations, because like you said in the beginning, I don't even know if a lot of people know that these conversations are an option.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And I don't think we get to make changes in our behavior until we sit back and say, gosh, you know what? Let me be curious about this. I've been doing X, Y, and Z, but why? Where did I learn I had to do that? Is it really something I want to continue? So again, I just love to see more and more women at least having these conversations and asking these questions.
So tell me about when you went viral on TikTok.
Oh, yes. My gosh. It's funny because I claimed, I've been at this particular, I was armchair psychology forever, one-on-one seeing clients. But then about 2 years ago, when I really stepped into this space, and figuring out how am I going to make this all work online with women all over the world, I had claimed in April, I believe, in a mastermind that I was a part of with a bunch of women and mostly coaches, I'd claimed on a Tuesday evening that I am ready for the world to know my name. I'm ready to be a household name for all girls to start having these conversations, women of all ages. 4 days later, the universe was like, okay, are you sure you're ready for that? Because here we go. And it was happening. I think I had like 75 people following me on TikTok. And within I posted that video got posted on a Saturday morning, and I couldn't even refreshing the page. It was like thousands and thousands and thousands of new followers were happening every 60 seconds. And, now I'm close to 300,000 followers, and so many incredible things are happening because of that. And it makes me so happy that I can bring these conversations. And now, I have so many women wanting me to talk more about relationships. And so there's a little bit of a broader, I've pulled the lens back a bit and am encompassing many different things right now, but we'll be zooming back in more. I mean, still the bulk of my work is women in the midlife space, but I actually just wrapped up an 8-week course last night. I had women from all over the world. I had some 20-year-olds in there because they said to me, I love these conversations. Like, I want to be thinking about this stuff. I want to be so excited each step of the way, because what I've learned in listening to them in my comment section is that this needle has moved back even further. Now in their 20s, they're being told, get Botox now to prevent aging.
I know.
I'm like, honey, nothing, let me just FYI, nothing prevents aging. There's no such thing. Believe it or not, you too are going to age.
And you've been aging since the day you were born.
That's a sign of success.
It's just that there happens to be an age or an era that becomes socially unacceptable for women to age. Right. Whereas because we're aging all the way through our lives.
Right, exactly. And so I just want to bring back that incredible feeling that ever so occasionally we'll see one of those women in the world somewhere, maybe in a movie, and it's like, she's that iconic aging woman. And it's really why I started Midlife Muse, is because I was searching for an icon to follow. I mean, I love Gloria Steinem, I love Mama Gema, but I really wanted a woman who stood for like the full range of these conversations, and I could not find her. Gloria Steinem was the closest I came. So I'm like, okay, so what do we do when we can't find something? We become it. So I thought, I will be the icon that I need. I will be the icon that women need. And surprisingly, 20-year-olds are working with me now, and so many 30-year-olds, so many women in their 30s. They're like, I don't have a woman to follow, to lead me in these conversations or spaces. And so I was shocked by that.
There is so much work for us to do for the younger women, so that they are prepared, not scared, is what I'm always saying. Certainly about menopause, but about just the aging process in general, because I'm fed up of women trying to squeeze themselves into little small boxes because of fear.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I just think that there's nothing to be afraid of. Actually, I think we miss the beauty and the magic when we're trying to suppress the fear. Like, sit with it and understand, like, I think the most amazing thing is if we actually sit with it and ask ourselves, what is it that I'm actually afraid of? We find that most of it is, I think most suffering comes from our own thoughts. And so if you get to reframe those thoughts, I always say to my clients who are coming from a place of fear around almost anything, let's reframe what gets to be the alternative, because you can sit and wallow in the fear and be stuck there because that's clearly not working for you. Or you can choose an alternative, and you can choose abundance. Anytime abundance is available to you. And I showcase all the ways in the world which there's overflowing abundance. And I tell them that is also inside of you. You get to choose to see the abundance of the woman you are or not. And from that place, from that energy, you will then see the world accordingly. So if you see yourself as with all of this negative connotation and the suffering and the victim mentality, that's all you're going to see in the world. But if you change your lens for abundance, and I help them very specifically get to that place, then all you see in the world is abundance. And guess what? That's what you attract back. So those women who are like, but I'm never going to find anybody. I've been divorced for 8 years. I'm like, no, with that mentality, you absolutely won't. There's nothing attractive about that energy. So I help them shift into a different way of being. And when you're being abundance, you are so magnetic, the whole world responds. So that's really where the work is. If it's about aging, if it's about dating, if it's about ancestral healing, whatever it's about, we always have the option to reach for a more beautiful narrative. It takes work to create it, but my gosh, that's where the freedom lives.
Powerful stuff. And another powerful thing that you did, just completely changing the subject, but you did a very powerful podcast about Roe versus Wade. Mm-hmm. And I'd love, if I may, just to dig into a little bit about that, because we don't have that over here, fortunately. But, you know, these things tend to spread. They tend to cross oceans and things. And we've already noticed, you know, differences in our narrative just because of what's happened. So I'd love to know, because that podcast really stopped me in my tracks. And you had a really good strategy for punishing the men folk. I think I seem to remember.
Oh my gosh. You know, so my belief is, again, do we want to be in victim mentality, or as far as like we were talking about with beauty culture, if we feel this is so hard to age and it's so much upkeep and there's so much expected of us, the only way that changes is by us closing our pocketbooks and choosing differently and saying, no, as a matter of fact, I'm not going to buy into that. Same thing with this. I'm like, okay, so if you're telling me in these certain states that I have no control over what I get to do with my body if I become pregnant unexpectedly, I've got a really great solution. I'll go buy a crystal dildo and I'll just take care of all of my own needs, which, you know, I'm doing anyways. But I mean, I am married, so that, you know, I'm not getting pregnant anytime soon, but I want to put the power back into women's hands. I'm like, yes, we can protest, we can march, we can do all the things, and we will keep doing all those things. But in the meantime, we have a choice, sisters. We don't have to open our legs. We can still have orgasm. We can still be in pleasure. We can take matters into our own hands. So I think that is what the world needs to actually finally freaking take women seriously. Instead of us running around like, oh my gosh, it's my body, it's my choice. And yes, of course it is. But guess what? No one's listening to that. It's actually, we're going in the opposite direction. This is the first time in history where my generation, my daughter is watching me and my generation go backwards instead of the forward movement. And she's 19 years old and she is flabbergasted at what's happening. And so I say to her as well, you and your girlfriends take matters into your own hands. Do all the fun things, the kissing, the heavy petting, all the things. But then when it comes to that time where you feel like, oh my gosh, I think we're about to have sex, you can say to them like, hey, you can masturbate and I can masturbate and we can do it here in the same room at the same time together. And that gets to be really hot in a totally different way. And that's how we get to change the narrative. Like, I think it's a very, very easy way forward. I really actually do. Like, let's start. But here's the thing. I had a potential client call me a couple of weeks ago or reach out to me in the messaging and say, I'd really like to work with you. I really want to be partnered again at some point in my life. I'm really, really scared that I'm never going to feel pleasure or have an orgasm again because I've been single for years and I'm not even dating anyone right now. And I asked her, where did you learn that you had to have a partner to have pleasure and orgasm? And she was dumbfounded. And she said, I've never even thought that it could be the other way. I mean, I know people talk about self-pleasure, but for me, it didn't even seem like an option. So there's this belief and this story and this system that keeps women deeply, this is like so many layers down, deeply trapped in the idea that you have to have the orgasm having sex with the guy. And no, you don't actually. Let's teach young girls about their bodies. Like I was talking to my daughter about self-pleasure when she was 12 years old. When she was 15, I bought her first dildo. It's like I wanted her to have the power to understand that she never has to rely on somebody else doing that for her, that there is no shame in her ever touching her own body. So until we start having that conversation, women are going to think that orgasm has to come through sex. And then there they end up with the pregnancy that was unwanted, and we just perpetuate deeper problems.
Yeah, it's a great solution.
So I'm like,
definitely,
ladies, I don't even know what we're talking about. Like, just get yourselves, you've got your hands. You don't even need to go buy anything. Like, you're good. And then let's see how long that has to happen before things change.
Mm.
Because this is all about controlling women. And
Yeah.
it's also
Oh,
about
yeah.
the narrative that sex is only for marriage and
Procreation.
procreation.
Try telling that to the men.
I don't have,
Yes,
yeah,
you can have sex once a year so we make a baby.
right,
There you go.
right. Yeah. So I really am in huge favor. And this is one of the big conversations I have with all women, but especially the youth, is like, you are not a victim. You are not a victim. The minute you understand that, you will carry so much power and so much ability to change the course of every aspect of your life. But people get off on being victims. It serves them really well. I got stuck in victim mentality for a very long time around my father leaving when I was 10. So I built my whole life around, well, if my dad hadn't left when I was 10, because it protected me from so many other
Exactly.
things. And I had to decide, like, do I really want to spend the rest of my life getting off on being a victim? Or do I think I maybe want to become a queen and be in the vastness of all the emotions that means and the vulnerability and take radical responsibility for myself? And that's when my whole life changed.
I'm all about radical responsibility. I love that. I love that
Yes.
whole idea. And that's my approach to menopause. We need to take radical responsibility for our menopause experience, because if we have a bad one, it's probably because we've had difficult past, or we haven't looked after ourselves very well, or we're not nourishing ourselves well, or we're carrying too much stress, or etc., etc., etc. We can do the victim, or we can do the radical responsibility and say, okay, well, I'm going to start listening to my body and I'm going to do something to change this.
Absolutely. I started about 2 months ago entering this perimenopausal, maybe even now menopausal phase. And I knew it was happening because I was getting a little bit of brain fog and I was bleeding for 3.5 weeks for both cycles. And I just was noticing digestion changes. It was 2 months of that. And I was like, okay, and now how do we support your system best, Amanda? So I'm working with a functional medicine doctor who she works with women here in South Florida, really around building, after looking at the blood work, building the best nutritional plan and supplemental plan to help your body naturally move through this time in life. Because I am adamant, I will not take bioidenticals. I will not do hormone replacement therapy. My mother did. My mother ended up with breast cancer, and it was hormone related, estrogen related. So I'm clearly not doing that. Even if she hadn't, I still wouldn't have. I'm very much a believer of the natural process, but I'm supporting my body through nutritional changes and supplement changes, lifestyle changes. And I'm also seeing a network care chiropractor, which is really almost hands-off chiropractic care. It's more about energy and making sure that my nervous system is constantly in communication and flow rather than blocked energy, because I've got a lot to do in this world. I'm creating and I'm on a very accelerated path, and I need to make sure that my nervous system and my energy are squeaky clean. So there are ways we can choose again to be the victim of, like, oh, I'm entering menopause, it's all going to be awful, let me brace myself and wait for the symptoms. Or I can say, okay, how do I best support this temple? How do I get it the most unbelievable nutrition that my body in particular needs? And how do I make sure that my nervous system and my energy are just spot on to get me through this huge transition I'm about to undergo?
And what can I learn from it? Because if you're
Yeah.
open and you're open to what you can learn from it, it's, well, regular listeners will know. I see it as a gift. I see it as a radical transformation for
Yes.
women. But it is to take that magnificent midlife, and make
Yeah.
it even more magnificent. And I applaud you on your approach.
Mm.
But you're open, you're curious. That's the thing. Just be open and curious to what's going on, and listen to your body. Because when you don't, that's when we get into trouble. And I think a lot of what you're talking about and the themes are just coming back to the feminine and the power of the feminine and embracing everything that we are, instead of thinking that everything that we are is in some way, bound in shame, embarrassment, that we are somehow inferior, that we get less as we get older. No, we don't. We get more. We get, more and more magnificent.
Oh my gosh, no human being would be here without a woman's body. Um,
I know. I love that. I mean,
it-
it's
it's
brilliant.
like the fact that I always joke around. I'm like, I don't even understand why women are struggling with feeling like second class citizens or less than. That's how strong we've allowed this narrative to be, because from where I stand and what I see and the women I work with, I'm like, we are the most powerful creatures, mind blowing. I can't even believe what we do, what we're capable of, how we hold it all, how we support so many people and our families, and have all these bodily changes every single month from the time we're
I
like
know.
13 to 60. It's like, wow, who does that? Who bleeds every single month and keeps going? And it's just, you don't have to convince me. Like,
We're
women
amazing.
are,
We
it's
are
just
amazing.
unbelievable. And I love men. Don't get me wrong. I have three sons. I absolutely love men. I'm not a male basher whatsoever, but this work, I can't even believe that I get to spend my days talking to women like you, supporting my clients, creating content for the masses, for women primarily. It really is such an honor, such an honor.
So, for a woman in midlife who is struggling a bit, what advice do you have for her?
I have the advice of get yourself a support system of like-minded women who want to have the curious conversations. I had a client say to me in one of my masterminds the other night, she said, being in your mastermind feels like I've gone back to college. We are having the most intimate and beautiful conversations with these groups of women that I didn't even know were conversations I could be having. And it's just opened up an entirely new world for me. So for women who are struggling, I would say get next to and in proximity with women who are having more beautiful conversations about what it means to be a woman in midlife, so that you can start to reframe and energetically respond to that and be considering that for yourself as well.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Magnificent Midlife Podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, follow, and share it. Also, giving a 5-star review really helps get the word out. You'll find the show notes at magnificentmidlife.com. That's also where you can get my book, Magnificent Midlife: Transform Your Middle Years, Menopause, and Beyond. Make the very best of your next chapter. Help me change the world, one magnificent midlife woman at a time.